I will now pre-trip underneath the hood on the driver's side for a 2014 International Conventional Style School Bus. We start over here with the wire harness. Securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not worn, torn, cut or frayed, and there is no spliced wire. Then I look at all my fluids. The transmission fluid is checked when the engine is running, and it is checked with a dipstick. The way you go about it, you take the dipstick off, you wipe it off, you put it back in, then you take it back out and check for adequate level, and then you put it back in. It is securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented or damaged, and it is not leaking. Over here there is the engine oil. The engine oil is checked when the engine is not running, and it is also checked with a dipstick. So the way you go about it, again, you take the dipstick out, you wipe it off, you put it back in, you take it back out again, check for adequate level, and put it back in. It is securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented or damaged, and it is not leaking. Over here there is the power steering fluid. It is checked when the engine is cool. There is no dipstick involved. It's an eyesight glass, so all you have to do is to check for adequate level. It is securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, broken, dirty or missing, and it is not leaking. Over here, this is the coolant reservoir for the radiator. You check the coolant when the engine is not running and when the engine is cool. And it is an eyesight glass, so all you have to do is to check for adequate level. It is securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, broken, dirty or missing, and it is not leaking. Over here, this is my air compressor. My air compressor is gear driven. It's easy to determine that it's gear driven because there is no belt. So if you don't see a belt, normally it is gear driven. You have to mention, the examiner wants to hear whether it is belt or gear driven. In this case, it is gear driven. Securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented or damaged, and not leaking. Then after that, you look at the different systems. You go system by system, that way it's easier to keep track and not overlook any component. I start with my steering system over here. So the steering system is this over here. So I start with the steering rod. The steering rod is straight aligned, securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented or damaged. Those over here are my U-joints. There's a U-joint here. There's a U-joint over there. They're securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented or damaged, and properly greased. This over here, that's the steering gearbox. My steering gearbox is securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented or damaged. This is my Pitman arm. The Pitman arm is securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented or damaged. This over here, this is the dragging linkage over here. The dragging linkage is straight aligned, securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented or damaged. This is the steering knuckle, like the knuckles, right? Your own knuckles. So the steering knuckle is securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented or damaged. And this is the steering arm over here. Steering arm is securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented or damaged. Over here, those are the cotter pins or cotter keys. There's one here, there's one there, and they are securely mounted. They are in their proper place, securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented, or damaged. And over here, a little bit, when you go further down the road, so to speak, with the steering system, there is the tie rod end. The tie rod end is securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented, or damaged. Then when I'm satisfied with that, that's the case now, I move on to the suspension system, starting with the spring mount over here. There's more than one spring mount. There's one there, there's one a bit further there, okay? And the spring mounts are securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented, or damaged. This over here, that is the leaf spring. The leaf spring is securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented, or damaged, and not shifted. The examiner wants to hear that it is not shifted. This over here, this is that component with a cylinder shape. That is the shock absorber. The shock absorber is securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented, or damaged, and not compressed. And these over here, those are the U-bolts. The U-bolts are securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts. They are not cracked, bent, dented, or damaged, and they secure the suspension system to the front axle. And the difference between a universal joint and a U-bolt is that a universal joint, that's what we saw a bit earlier, it's a bit like your knees or your elbows. That's an articulation, so to speak. Whereas the U-bolt is only a clip that holds two components together, and that's it. Now that I'm done with the suspension system, I move on to my air brake system, starting with the air chamber over here. My air chamber is securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented, or damaged, not leaking. And the hoses, that's the hose over here for my air chamber. It is securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not worn, torn, cut, or frayed, not leaking, no soft bulging spot outside that could indicate possible damage inside, and the clamps are into place. And this over here, this is the slack adjuster push rod. Slack adjuster push rod is securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented, or damaged. It is checked when the vehicle is parked at ground level, when the parking brake is released, and when the one wheel is chucked. And when it is checked, there should be a pulley of no more than 1 inch pushing or pulling. Then I continue with my air brake system. I go to the inner wheel. It's kind of tough to see clearly what is there, but as long as you point in the right direction, the examiner should be satisfied with your description. So I start with the inner rim. The inner rim is securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented, or damaged, no illegal welding, and no rust. Then I mentioned the drum. Securely mounted, no missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, dented, or damaged. Also the brake linings, pads, and shoes. They are to be not dangerously thin, and they are to not be covered with dust, grease, or other fluids such as engine oil. So this completes the pre-trip underneath the hood on the driver's side.